You feel it before you can name it. The tension, the strange heaviness in the room, as if the air became too thick, too sharp. You walk away from the conversation drained, your thoughts scrambled, your confidence shaken, and you don't even know why. But your body knows. Your soul knows. You've just been poisoned. Some people don't need knives to wound you. They do it with a look, with a joke, with silence that stretches just long enough to cut you. These people are toxic, not because they're evil in some grand, cinematic way, but because being around them makes you forget who you are. And over time, that can destroy everything inside you. We all meet them. At work, in family, in friendships we once called sacred. They wear different masks, the victim, the manipulator, the narcissist, the pessimist who always drags you down. But behind every mask is the same result: confusion, exhaustion, the shrinking of your inner fire. So what do you do? What do you do when someone's presence in your life is like smoke in your lungs? When they say they care, but every word stings. When you give and they only take, you stop waiting for them to change. That's the first step. You stop hoping they'll wake up one day and see the damage they're causing. Because they won't. Not because they're incapable, but because, to them, it works. The manipulation, the guilt-tripping, the silent control. It works. And if something works, why change? This is the brutal truth most people don't want to face. We keep forgiving, we keep explaining, we keep making excuses for them, because we're kind, because we believe in love, because we think, maybe they're just going through something. But meanwhile, piece by piece, they are consuming us. And one day, we don't recognize ourselves in the mirror. So you must draw the line. Not with noise, not with drama, but with clarity. You stop participating in their games. You stop explaining yourself to someone who doesn't want to understand. You stop showing up for someone who never shows up for you. You become unavailable, not out of hate, but out of self-respect. And don't expect applause. Don't expect the toxic person to say, "You're right, I was hurting you." No, they'll accuse you of being selfish, of abandoning them, of being cruel. But listen, protecting your peace will always look like betrayal to those who benefit from your chaos. Let them say what they will. You are not responsible for their narrative. You are only responsible for your life. Because the longer you entertain a toxic presence, the more you delay your own healing. It's like holding on to a burning coal, hoping the other person feels the heat. But you're the one getting burned. Every time you respond, every time you justify, every time you lower your standards to keep the peace, you lose a piece of yourself. Silence is powerful. Distance is clarity. Absence is a message. And once you give yourself the space to breathe again, something beautiful begins to happen. You start remembering who you were before you were drained, before you started questioning your worth, before someone convinced you that love means sacrifice without limits. You realize that love doesn't hurt. Control does. Love doesn't suffocate. Fear does. There will be grief, of course. Letting go of a toxic person often feels like mourning, because even if they harmed you, there were good moments. And your heart will hold on to those. But don't confuse memories with reality. Don't confuse potential with pattern. People show you who they are not with their words, but with their consistent behavior. Believe it. You don't need to fight. You don't need to prove. You just need to walk away, and stay away. Not because you hate them, but because you finally remembered to love yourself. And when the guilt comes, and it will, remind yourself, the boundary is not punishment. It is protection. You are not bad for choosing peace. You are brave, because in a world that teaches you to endure, to be loyal at all costs, to carry what breaks you, you chose to let go. And that is power. After you walk away, the silence can feel deafening. At first, you might question yourself. Was it really that bad? Maybe I overreacted. Maybe they didn't mean to hurt me. That's how deep their influence runs. They condition you to doubt your own reality. And that's the real damage, when you no longer trust your own perception of pain. But stay with the silence. Let it settle. Breathe into it. Because in that stillness, something important will rise. Truth. The kind of truth you buried under years of emotional negotiation. The truth that says, yes, it was that bad. It was constant. It was heavy. And no, it wasn't your fault. You see, toxic people don't always scream or threaten. They often operate in whispers and smiles. They disguise harm as concern. They break your spirit while pretending to protect it. And the scariest part, they can make you believe you need them. That without them, you are weak, alone, lost. That's the hook. They give just enough kindness to keep you close. Just enough praise to confuse you. just enough attention to keep you hoping, but never enough to make you feel safe, never enough to let you grow, because your growth threatens them, your strength reminds them of their lack of control. And this is where most people get stuck, in the cycle, the back and forth, the guilt. The moment you begin to pull away, they sense it, they reach out, they say the right thing, they promise change, and for a second, your heart softens. You remember the good times. You think, maybe this time it'll be different. But patterns don't lie. Change doesn't happen in apologies, it happens in consistency. And consistency is the one thing they never deliver. They're masters of moments, but failures of stability. They can charm a room, but they poison a home. They can wear empathy like a costume, but underneath, they crave control. That's why detachment is so hard, because it doesn't just mean blocking a number or walking out of a room. It means breaking an emotional contract you never agreed to sign. It means unlearning the idea that you must tolerate pain to prove your worth. It means finally choosing yourself in a story where you were always the afterthought. So you go quiet, not in fear, but in power. You don't send the last message. You don't explain your silence. You simply stop feeding the bond, because that's what it was, emotional starvation with breadcrumbs of connection. You stop accepting crumbs. And when they notice the shift, they will try to pull you back. They will test the locks. They will send bait wrapped in nostalgia. They will call you cold, heartless, ungrateful. But don't answer. You owe no one access to your peace. Especially not the person who shattered it. People will tell you to forgive. And you can. Forgiveness is for you, not for them. But forgiveness does not mean access. Forgiveness does not mean exposure. You can forgive someone and still never let them near your soul again. That is not cruelty. That is wisdom. Because you've learned now, energy is not infinite. Peace is not a luxury. And love, real love, doesn't bruise your spirit. It doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't thrive on your silence or rely on your confusion. Real love expands you. It frees you. It gives you space to become. And toxic people hate that. Because when you are free, they lose control. When you are at peace, they lose power. When you no longer need their approval, they become invisible. And that, to them, is unbearable. But to you, it is freedom. You don't need a confrontation. You don't need closure. Some stories end without a clean break. Some people walk out of your life mid-sentence. And that's okay. You don't need to finish the chapter to leave the book behind. The real healing begins when you stop trying to make sense of their madness. When you stop searching for the perfect words that will finally make them understand. They won't. Not because they can't, but because they don't want to. Understanding would mean accountability. And accountability is the one thing they will never carry. So carry yourself instead, forward, into days where your heart is light, into rooms where your name is spoken with respect, into relationships where your energy is not currency, but joy. And yes, you may still think of them. That's normal. Pain doesn't evaporate. It echoes. But with each echo, you become less reactive, less fragile, more whole. You learn that peace is not a place you find. It is a boundary you build. It is the silence you choose. It is the life you protect. You remember who you were before they taught you to forget. And that version of you, that person is still there, still waiting, still strong. They tried to dim you, but the flame survived. You are not broken. You were just poisoned. But now, you are healing. There's something strange that happens after you walk away from a toxic person. Your body is free, but your mind is still in chains. You replay the past. You analyze every word. You hear their voice in your head, telling you it was your fault, that you were too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. And for a while, you believe it. That's the second wound, the one you give yourself. It's invisible, but it's deep. Because when you leave someone toxic, they don't just disappear. They leave behind a narrative, a distorted version of you that you might start to accept. They train you to carry their voice long after they're gone. But listen, those thoughts aren't yours. That shame you feel, planted, that hesitation to speak up, conditioned, that guilt for choosing peace, inherited from the person who profited from your pain. You're not too much. You were simply in the wrong room, among people too small to hold your truth, people who feared your light and tried to dim it with doubt. But now, you're out, you've stepped away, and you get to rewrite everything, because healing from a toxic person is not just about walking away from them, it's about walking back to yourself, slowly, kindly, with patience. You start small. You speak kindly to yourself, even when your mind fights back. You remind yourself, I am not what they said I am. I am not their disappointment. I am not their chaos. I am not the weakness they projected onto me. I am whole. I am enough. I am free. And the more you repeat that, the more it becomes your truth. Your nervous system starts to calm. You stop bracing for the next insult. You stop waiting for love to hurt. You stop expecting affection to come with conditions. You begin to trust again, not others, at first, but yourself, your judgment, your instincts, your boundaries. You learn to say no without guilt, to say yes without fear, to say nothing at all and still feel worthy. And slowly, your world shifts. People notice. They sense the change. Some will celebrate it, some will fear it, because the version of you that tolerated disrespect is gone. The version that kept peace by destroying yourself no longer exists. And that's threatening to those who knew you as easy to control. But you won't go back, because you've tasted something sacred, self-respect. You've discovered the power of your own space. You've realized that love is not measured by how much pain you can endure for someone. It's measured by how deeply you're willing to protect your soul. And protecting yourself is not selfish. It is sacred. You start recognizing the signs sooner. The red flags no longer look romantic. The passive aggression no longer feels like passion. The manipulation no longer sounds like love. You've developed an internal compass, and it points to peace. You no longer chase people who drain you. You no longer argue to be heard by those who don't want to understand. You don't beg to stay in places where your worth is questioned. You move differently now. You speak with less urgency. You listen with more discernment. You carry yourself like someone who remembers. Because you do remember now what it feels like to be empty, to be erased. And you promised yourself, never again. And even on the days when loneliness creeps in, you don't panic. Because you've realized that solitude is not the enemy. Chaos is. You've learned that being alone is peaceful. Being misunderstood is survivable. Being honest is worth it. And your standards rise. Not in arrogance, but in clarity. You don't hate toxic people. You simply no longer have room for them. Your time has become expensive. Your heart, guarded. Your energy, sacred. People will call you cold, detached, changed, good. You didn't survive to stay soft for those who hardened you. You don't owe anyone the version of yourself that was built in trauma. You are allowed to evolve. To become quiet where you once screamed. To leave where you once begged. To block where you once explained. That's not cruelty. That's growth. And here's the most important part. You start building a life that makes the toxic past irrelevant. A life that feels safe. A life that fits. You surround yourself with people who don't require your pain as proof of love. People who don't flinch when you speak your truth. People who honor your no and celebrate your yes. People who meet your energy without draining it. That's the gift of walking away. Not just freedom from them, but freedom to choose something better. You finally understand, being loved poorly is not better than being alone. That a full schedule doesn't mean a full soul. That constant connection doesn't equal emotional safety. You stop romanticizing intensity. You start craving peace. And peace, it turns out, is not boring. It is revolutionary. It is rare. It is the quiet revolution of a person who once begged for crumbs and now demands the feast of their own becoming. You're not healed yet. That takes time. But you're healing. And every boundary you hold is a stitch. Every truth you speak is a balm. Every moment you walk away from what hurts is a prayer answered. Keep walking. You're not lost. You're returning. There will be moments when the past tries to pull you back. A song, a place, a scent, something small will ignite a memory. And suddenly, you're there again. Back in that moment, back in that room, back in that version of yourself who tolerated what now feels unbearable. But you don't stay there. Because now you know that nostalgia is a liar. It smooths out the pain. It dresses up the wounds. It whispers, maybe it wasn't so bad. But memory is selective. It hides the aftermath. It forgets the nights you couldn't sleep, the days you walked on eggshells, the way you stopped laughing without even noticing. And when those memories hit, you don't fight them. You let them rise. You look them in the eye. And then, you let them go. Because healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about reclaiming it. About saying, yes, that happened. Yes, it hurt. But no, it does not define me anymore. You're allowed to mourn what never was. The version of the relationship you wished existed. The fantasy you clung to when reality was too sharp. You're allowed to cry over the hope that was crushed again and again. You're allowed to grieve the love you gave that was never returned. But then, you rise. Because you realize your love wasn't wasted. It was a reflection of your strength, your loyalty, your depth, and even if they couldn't receive it, it still mattered. you still mattered. And maybe they'll move on quickly. Maybe they'll act like you never existed. That's what toxic people do. They replace. They erase. They reframe the story so they're the victim. And that might sting, but that's not your concern anymore. You don't need to monitor their growth. You don't need to measure their regret. You don't need their apology to be free. Forgiveness isn't about them. It's about reclaiming your energy, your future, your peace. You don't forgive to excuse the pain. You forgive so you can finally put it down. You've carried it long enough, and when you begin to meet new people, you'll feel the urge to explain, to over-justify your boundaries, to warn them about how hard you are to love now. But you don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to apologize for being cautious. You don't have to water yourself down to be digestible. You are not too much. You are finally enough, for yourself. You start to recognize the difference between attention and affection, between desire and respect, between intensity and intimacy. You stop mistaking pain for passion. You stop chasing people who pull away. You stop loving as a means to earn validation. And love changes. It becomes quieter, safer, less performative. You no longer need the fireworks. You need the fire that stays lit, even on hard days. The love that doesn't burn you to feel real. The love that doesn't play games, test limits, or make you prove your worth. You've lived in survival mode long enough. You've done the begging, the justifying, the explaining. Now it's time for calm, for clarity, for softness that doesn't bleed. And you start to protect that calm like a fortress. You no longer let just anyone in, not because you're cold, but because you know what it costs to rebuild yourself. You know how much work it took to feel safe again. You know how long it took to breathe without fear. So you protect your space, not with walls, but with wisdom. You listen more. You observe more. You let people reveal themselves in their patterns, not just their words. You trust actions over promises, energy over appearance, peace over potential, because potential is the lie you used to cling to. Maybe they'll change. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe if I just love them better. But not anymore. You're done gambling on maybes. You choose what's real now, what's proven, what's healthy, and your life begins to feel different. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. You wake up without dread. You go to sleep without 1,000 questions spinning in your head. You laugh without a knot in your stomach. You speak without shrinking. You live, not in reaction to someone else, but in rhythm with your own soul. That's the real gift. Not just freedom from them, but freedom to be you, fully, without fear, without shame, without the constant hum of survival. And you realize, you were never too much. You were just around people too limited to meet you. You were never too emotional. You just had emotions they couldn't handle. You were never too difficult. You were just unwilling to keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. You're not hard to love. You just finally know what love is supposed to feel like. And when people ask you what happened, why you changed, you smile. Because how do you explain to someone that you had to unlearn everything you thought love was? How do you explain that you once confused silence with peace, chaos with love, manipulation with passion? You don't. You just live. You live like someone who's been through fire but no longer smells like smoke. You live like someone who doesn't need to scream to feel heard, who doesn't need to beg to be seen, who doesn't need to suffer to feel alive. You live like someone who's finally come home, to themselves. The real transformation doesn't happen the moment you walk away. It happens in the weeks, months, sometimes years after. When no one's watching, when no one claps, when you're left alone with the silence, and it doesn't scare you anymore. At first, that silence feels brutal, like the world stopped spinning, like something is missing, but then you realize, what's missing isn't love, it's noise, drama, the unpredictable storm of someone else's emotions hijacking your peace. You start noticing what freedom actually feels like. It's not always bright and joyful. Sometimes it's soft, quiet, even a little awkward, because you're not used to it. You're not used to waking up without anxiety. You're not used to not checking your phone with dread. You're not used to trusting the calm. But you start learning, slowly, like a child relearning how to walk. You learn that not everyone deserves access to you. You learn that it's okay to say, I don't like how that feels, and walk away. You learn that your intuition isn't something to silence, it's something to honor. You learn that boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They're doors that only open to those who knock with respect. And those lessons, hard-earned, painfully learned, begin to shape the person you're becoming. You speak differently, not louder, not sharper, just clearer. You love differently, not harder, not more, just cleaner. without the desperation, without the self-abandonment, without the fear of being alone. You start choosing relationships that don't need fixing. People who don't see you as a project. People who don't need you to explain why you matter. People who show up without making you earn it. And slowly, the idea of toxic changes in your mind. It's no longer just about the obviously cruel ones. It's also about those who invalidate your feelings in subtle ways. Who smile while undermining you. Who only love the version of you that stays small. You become sensitive to those micro-injuries. The dismissive tone, the delayed reply, the forced laughter, the small lies that add up to something heavy. You don't tolerate those things anymore, not because you're dramatic, but because you're awake. You used to survive on emotional crumbs. Now you demand the feast, not in arrogance, not in entitlement, but in clarity, because you finally understand the cost. You know what it feels like to question your own reality. You know what it means to sacrifice your mental health just to keep someone else comfortable. You've done that. You survived that. You're not going back. And you start showing up for yourself. You make choices that feel good long-term, not just in the moment. You say no, even when your voice shakes. You say yes, not to please, but because it aligns. You rest. You play. You create. You connect, not to prove anything, not to distract yourself, but because you enjoy being alive again. That's the secret no one tells you. Healing doesn't just give you back your peace. It gives you back your joy, the little things, the quiet mornings, the deep laughs, the ability to sit with yourself without shame or restlessness. You feel whole, not because someone completed you, but because you stopped allowing people to chip pieces away from you. And yes, you'll still have weak moments. Days where the old patterns whisper in your ear, when the loneliness creeps in, when you wonder if maybe, just maybe, you were too harsh, too guarded, too unforgiving. That's when you breathe, and you remember how far you've come. You remember the nights you cried yourself to sleep, praying for clarity. You remember the times you questioned your sanity after another gaslighting conversation. You remember what it felt like to walk on eggshells, always trying not to set them off. You're not going back to that. You're not sacrificing your soul to be understood by someone who refuses to listen. You're not dimming your fires so others can feel more comfortable in their own shadows. You are not responsible for fixing people who benefit from being broken. You've reclaimed your time, your energy, your identity, and now, finally, you begin to live on your terms. You define love by how it feels in your body, not just how it sounds in someone's mouth. You define safety by how consistent someone is when they don't get what they want. You define connection by how mutual the effort is, not just how badly you wish it were real. And in this new life, something beautiful happens. You attract peace. Not just in people, but in experiences, in environments, in the way you carry yourself. The energy shifts. Not because you tried harder, but because you stopped trying where it hurt. You let go of who you were forced to become to survive. You return to who you were always meant to be. Not perfect, not invincible, but whole, grounded, unshakable in your knowing. You used to need their love to feel okay. Now, you only need your own. And that's not loneliness. That's liberation. There comes a moment in every healing journey when you look back, not to return, but to witness. To see it all clearly, maybe for the first time. Not through the lens of longing, or regret, or guilt, but through the eyes of someone who survived. You remember the first time they crossed your boundary. How small it seemed. A comment brushed off. A joke that stung. A look that made you question your worth. And how you stayed. You gave them the benefit of the doubt. You told yourself, it's not a big deal. But it was. Because what hurts once, ignored, will hurt twice. Then 10 times. Then every day. Until it becomes normal. Until your pain becomes routine. Until your silence becomes a language of survival. But now, you've unlearned that language. Now, you name what hurts. You don't pretend. You don't suppress. You don't smile to keep others comfortable while bleeding inside. You remember how exhausted you were. Not from doing too much, but from doing too much for people who never gave back. From carrying conversations. From fixing every conflict. From being the emotional adult in relationships with people who refuse to grow. You remember how they twisted everything. How I'm hurt became you're too sensitive. How I need space became you're abandoning me. How this isn't working became you're the problem. You remember how they rewrote the script so you'd always be the villain. So they could stay the victim. And you almost believed it. But you didn't. Because some part of you stayed awake. Some part of you whispered, even when you couldn't hear it clearly, this is not love. This is not right. You deserve better. That voice saved you. That voice, buried under years of gaslighting and guilt, that was your truth fighting to survive. And now it's louder. Now it's the voice you trust. The voice that tells you, love should not require your suffering. Respect should not be negotiated. Peace should not be a reward you earn for pleasing someone else. You know that now. And that knowing is power. It changes the way you show up in the world. You stop explaining your worth. You stop auditioning for acceptance. You stop bleeding for people who won't even offer you a bandage. You live with quiet certainty. Not because you're better, but because you're finally aligned. You don't chase closure. You don't need someone's validation to heal. You don't need them to say, you were right, for you to trust your own memory. You forgive, not to welcome them back, but to release the grip they had on your nervous system. You let go, not because they deserve peace, but because you do. And one day, you meet someone new. They're kind, gentle, safe, and for a moment, you flinch. Because safety feels unfamiliar. Because love without chaos feels suspicious. Because you've been trained to expect the worst. But this time, you stay. You breathe through the discomfort. You let yourself receive. You let love in without preparing for war. And it's different, not perfect, but honest. You speak, and they listen. You cry, and they stay. You falter, and they don't use it against you. This is what love feels like when it's not built on fear. And if no one comes, if you remain alone, you're still whole. Because you've built a life that doesn't depend on someone else showing up. You are no longer half a heart looking for the other piece. You are the full flame. You create peace wherever you go, because it lives inside you now. And when the toxic ones circle back, and they always do, you don't engage. You see through the script, the sudden apology, the "I miss you," the nostalgia they weaponize. You don't fall for it, because you're not the same person they broke. You're not wounded, you're wise. You don't need to destroy them. You don't need revenge. You don't even need them to suffer. You've simply outgrown the space where pain was normal. And that's the most powerful thing you can do, grow, silently, steadily, into someone who chooses peace over punishment, self-worth over sacrifice, truth over illusion. You don't fight anymore. You walk, and in your walking, you reclaim your life, not with noise, but with grace. And that is how you deal with toxic people. You rise, quietly, fully, and forever free.